Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for being here. I'm Courtney Hurston from the English department, and I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, Matt Johnson. I'd just like to start out by thanking those who are supporting this event. The reading is possible with generous support from the English department, the Oregon Humanities Center, the Ethnic Studies department, the Comparative Lit program, and the College of Arts and Sciences. So many thanks to our sponsors. Matt Johnson, who's here with us today, is author of the novels Pym, Drop, and Hunting in Harlem, the nonfiction novella The Great Negro Plot, and the graphic novels Incognegro and Dark Rain. Johnson is a recipient of the James Baldwin Fellowship and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, among other honors, and he's a faculty member in creative writing at the University of Houston. So I could definitely go on for hours about all of Johnson's works, but I'm not going to torture you. You're not here to hear me talk. So I'll say a bit about each of them just to give you a sense of his canon. Drop, a Barnes & Noble Discover Great Writers selection in 2000, traces the journey of the compelling, heart-tugging, and sometimes incredibly frustrating protagonist, Chris Jones. Like Henry James, James Baldwin, and Richard Wright before him, Matt Johnson portrays a flawed hero who really defines his Americanness by going abroad. The metropoles of Drop, however, are West Philly and London, and this novel gets, I think, way weirder and far more satiric than the average villain from Johnson's second novel, Hunting in Harlem, is part satire of gentrification and part noir detective not thriller, really kind of in the tradition of Chester Himes and Rudolph Fisher, I think. Three ex-cons trying to forge a new life working for a real estate company, suspicious deaths among tenants, and rumors of a chupacabra loose in Harlem are the unexpected elements that make this novel really a wild ride. Walter Mosley says of Hunting in Harlem, Matt Johnson's breathless thriller cuts to the heart of gentrification. Implausibly humorous, righteously terrifying, Johnson has written a cautionary tale for our time. The Great Negro Plot is Matt's artful nonfiction work about an alleged slave conspiracy in New York in 1741. Matt tells the story of this plot and the harsh retributions against all accused with both the characteristic wit of his contemporary voice and with real scholarly depth. His treatment of the actual 1712 slave rebellion and the white hysteria and fear of revolt in 1741 bring a storyteller's sensibility to a lesser-known bit of American history. As many of you know, Matt is also the author of some terrific graphic novels. Incognegro, illustrated by Warren Cleese and inspired by the life of Walter White, tells the tale of Zane Pinchback, a Harlem journalist. Pinchback passes for white in order to report on lynchings in the South in the 1930s. Dark Rain, a New Orleans story, words Matt and images Simon Gain, marries the historical fiction of Incognegro with the gritty crime narrative of Hunting in Harlem. This graphic novel gives equally compelling weight, I think, to New Orleans in the days after Hurricane Katrina and the story of two ex-cons attempting to rob a bank in New Orleans Congo Square. Matt's newest novel, Pym, was published in March to great acclaim. Chris James is a professor of African American literature whose course, Dancing with Darkies, Whiteness in the Literary Mind, has failed to attract many students. Denied tenure and obsessed with 19th century rare books and slave narratives, Chris begins what the New York Times calls an uproarious and hard-driving journey into the heart of whiteness. James assembles a crew and heads to Antarctica in search of a land of black people described in Edgar Allan Poe's one and only novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. If this is not whet your readerly appetite yet, let me list some of what you will encounter in Pym. A dog named White Folks, an African-American psychic determined to prove she has Native American ancestry, an eccentric billionaire painter known as the Master of Light, a race of snow honkies, and the surprising trade value of a carton of Little Debbie snack cakes. Johnson's Pym has earned rave reviews. The New York Times Book Review calls it relentlessly entertaining and masterly. Fresh Air's Maureen Corrigan describes the novel as loony, disrespectful, and sharp. The Washington Post celebrates Pym's seemingly effortless blend of the serious, comic, and fantastic, and asserts Pym really shouldn't be missed. But perhaps my favorite of the many positive responses to this novel comes from Colson Whitehead, who says, "You can trust the veracity of this account. Pym is spectacularly sly and nimble-footed send-up of this world, the next world, and all points in between. A satire with heart, as courageous as it is cunning." Matt will read today from Pym, discuss his work on graphic novels, and show you some images, and answer questions following the reading. Please join me in welcoming Matt Johnson.
Thank you, Courtney. Courtney did a lot to bring me out here, so I'm really appreciative of that. It's been great to be here, and I was happy to witness your one sunny day yesterday and share that with you. I'm going to do something I actually have never done. What I'm going to do is give a reading for about 15 minutes, and then at the end of that reading, I'm going to show you how I put together my graphic novels. PIM took 9 years, and every draft took about 2 years. And I'd work on a draft for 2 years, and then I'd send it to friends to read it and to my agent. And in that time, waiting for them to come back to me, I would write a graphic novel script. And the book would come back to me, and I'd have to work on it for another 2 years, and then repeat the process. So during that time of writing this one very short novel, I ended up writing 3 different graphic novels as well. So before this, most of the time I go around and I talk about the graphic novel stuff, so it's nice to go places as a novelist again. So I'm just going to jump in and read the first chapter, and then I'll pause from that, and then we'll see if we can get the A-B thing going. Always thought if I didn't get tenure, I would shoot myself, or strap a bomb to my chest and walk into the faculty cafeteria. But when it happened, I just got bourbon drunk and cried a lot and rolled into a ball on my office floor. A couple days of this, and I couldn't take it. So I ended classes a week early and checked into the Aquaba bed and breakfast in Harlem to be among my own race and party away the pain. But mostly, I found myself back in that same Baltimore. Still on the floor, just at a more historically resonant address. My buddy, Garth Frierson, he'd been laid off about 6 months before and was nice enough to drive all the way from Detroit to help a childhood friend. This mostly consisted of him sitting his bus driver ass on my rented bed, busting on me until I had enough shame to get off my own duff and try to make something of myself again. By then, the term was over. Graduation done, campus vacant. I didn't want to see anybody. The only thing worse than the ones who were happy about my dismissal were the ones that weren't. The sympathy, the condolences. It was all so white. I was the only black male professor on campus, professor of African American literature, professional Negro. Over the years since my original hire, I pushed away from that and insisted on teaching American literature in general, following a path towards my passion, towards Edgar Allan Poe. Specifically, I offered a course, Dancing with the Darkness, Whiteness in the Literary Mind, twice a year, regardless of enrollment. In regard to the number of students who chose to attend the seminar, I must say in my defense that the greatest ideas are often presented to empty chairs. However, a different idea on the proper class size was cited in my denial letter from the president and given as a reason to overturn the faculty's approval. Curing America's racial pathology couldn't be done with good intentions or presidential elections. Like all diseases, it had to be analyzed at a microscopic level. What I discovered during my studies in Poe and other early American texts was the intellectual source of racial whiteness. Here, in these pages, was the very fossil record of how this odd and illogical sickness formed. Here was the twisted mythic underpinnings of modern racial thought that could never before be dismantled because we were standing on it. You don't cure an illness by ignoring it or just fighting the symptoms. A Kleenex has never eradicated a cold. I was doing essential work affecting domestic policy, foreign policy, the entire social fabric of the most powerful nation in the world, work that related directly to the way we lived our daily lives and perceived reality itself. Who cared if a bunch of overprivileged 19-year-olds with questionable hygiene could be bothered to rise for the 8 a.m. class? Who cared if I chose not to waste even more precious research time attending the toothless diversity committee? Just get your books, dog, and get out of there. Pack up your place. Focus on what you can do. You want, you can come back with me to Detroit. It's cheap. I got a big crib. Ain't no jobs, but still. Garth and I drove up the Taconic in the rain. I was still drunk, and the wet road was like lines on a snake's back, and my stomach was going to spill. Even drunk, I knew any escape plan that involved going to Detroit, Michigan was a harbinger of doom. Garth Frierson was my boy, from when we were boys, from when I lived in a basement apartment in Philly, and he lived over the laundromat next door. Garth didn't even ask how many books I had, but he must have suspected. Because I had books. I had books like a lit professor has books. And then I had more books, finer books, first editions, rare prints, copies signed by hands long dead. Angela walked out of me a long time ago, and my chance of children walked with her, but I had multiplied in my own way. I had shelves built in my office for these books, shelves 10 feet tall and completely lining the drawer level. The campus was dead. A vacant compound hidden from the road by darkness and hulking pines. The gravel lot was empty, but I made Garth park in the spot that said, "President, violators will be towed on principle." When you get denied tenure at a college like this, intimate, good, but not great, your career is over. A decade of job preparation and no one else will hire you. If you haven't published enough, people assume tenure denial means you never will. If you have published and were still denied, people assume you're an asshole. Nobody wants to give a job for life to an asshole. And they didn't have to in this economy. Outside of a miracle, after denial, I'd be lucky to scrounge up adjunct teaching at a community college somewhere cold, barren, and far from the ocean. A life of little health insurance, bill collector calls, and classrooms with metal detectors. All compliments of this college president, Mr. Bowtie. The least I could do was shit in his space for an hour. We trudged. The building looked like an old church that had lost its faith. Every step up the stairs was sacrilege. Garth huffed but followed. I'd chosen an office in the back of the top floor to dissuade students, but my lecturers had done a better job of this. My office was a narrow A-frame cathedral with a matching window, a shrine to the books that lined the walls and my own solitude. "Bro, I'm not going to lie to you. I've got a lot of books in here," I said, letting him in first. "You do?" Garth asked me. Because I didn't. It was empty. I should have been greeted with hundreds of colored spines of literary loves, but there was nothing. My books were gone. My office had been cleared out. Everything was gone. My pictures, my lamp, my Persian rug, everything not school property or nailed down, gone. A chasm of vacant whitewashed bookshelves opened up before me. I was breathless. Garth was out of breath, but for him it was just all the stairs. "They took my shit, man! They took my shit!" I kept repeating. I walked up to the desk and pulled out all the drawers. There were some chewed yellow pencils left and a few folded Post-its and a bent paperclip, but that's not what I was looking for. I kept searching, desperate, sliding pencils and papers around, looking for more. "Damn, dog, you didn't have no porn in there, did you?" Martin already had his Little Debbie out and was chewing on it like it was his reward for making it up 3 floors of 19th century stairs. "Just a picture," I told him. "A picture of what?" "Angela," I admitted. "Worse," Garth said, head wagging. I slammed the door shut, and it was loud. And I liked that sound, a moment of violence, but this time coming from me. So then I started banging on the empty shelves with my fists, and they vibrated. You could hear the echo in the room, then bouncing off into the empty building beyond us until Garth closed the door. "That's wrong, man, disrespectful. Forget them. Job's over. That's life. What are you going to do?" I was going to show up at the president's house and kick his ass, it occurred to me. This act suddenly seemed like the only thing worth running to Detroit for. I didn't tell Garth this because he would have stopped me. He was big enough to fill up the door. He was even bigger since he'd been laid off. I remember him when he was skinny, ran track. Ran it poorly, but still. It was depressing to look at every extra pound on him, each a reminder that we were both moving swiftly into decline with little else as accomplishment. "Wait in the car, man. I just have to check my mail," I told him. Garth did it. I'm a bad liar, but he was tired and it was really cold outside, and brothers don't like the cold, Matthew Henson excluded. It was late spring, but it had been raining for a week, and upstate New York was frigid in a way which was more gothic and empiric than the Philly chill that we'd grown up with. "You drunk, I'm tired as hell. The sooner you get your ass out of here, the sooner you get your ass out of here," Garth offered, but he left. So then I walked over to the president's house to punch him and maybe kick him a few times too. In my head, I was getting gangsta. which I've always felt showed greater intent than getting gangster, and that it expresses a willful unlawfulness even upon its own linguistic representation. I was going to show him how we do where I'm from, go straight Philly on him. And I knew all about that, because although I'd never actually punched someone in the face before, as a child, I myself had been on the receiving end of that act several times and was a quick study. The president's house was at the other end of the campus, but it was a small liberal arts campus. An empty space, dorms and a building deserted, solar street lamps popping on and off for just me. While I was walking, stoking my anger, thinking of all the work I'd done and all the security I was now being denied, I came to the administration building and I saw that there was a light on, downstairs in the back, in the president's office. No one just left interior lights on, the environmental footprint too massive, the cost too high. With every attack, the prices went even higher. So he was in there. The outside door opened and I knew he was in there. And then there was this overwhelming emotion. It was not rage or anger. It was something even more illicit, unwanted. It was hope. Here we were, two men alone, society vacated, and now just two men and a problem, one that somehow, in my stupor, seemed workable. There was a guy down the hall, a romanticist who'd been denied tenure 10 years ago, approved by the faculty committee, just as I was, only to be shot down by the same president in the same manner. And he had, in his grief, approached the all-powerful boss man and had repented all of his sins, real and imagined, and was granted a permanent teaching gig. It made sense, too, for as Frederick Douglass's narrative tells us, it's more valuable to a master to have a morally broken slave than to have a confident one. That romanticist story had always seemed humiliating to me before that moment, but suddenly it became an inspiration. At the president's door, I paused, prepared myself for what could be simply the final test before I overcame my troubles. I took a deep breath to prepare for my performance of dignified groveling. Then I heard the music coming from inside. What I saw scared me, took me out of my confidence, my momentum. What do you mean of a Jew sitting in the dark listening to Wagner in this day and age? I could think of no more call to the end of the world than the one I was looking at. Random violence on the news had become background noise to me at this point, but this scene genuinely scared my ass. Still in his bow tie and tweed jacket at this time of night, it was disgusting. He hit the keyboard quickly, and suddenly the sound became Mahler, but I knew what I had. As the sound cleansed the room, the bald man just looked at me, drink in hand. As drunk as I was, I could still smell the sweet singe of alcohol hanging in the air. My shit! It came out. It lacked the eloquence of a planned rebuttal, but he understood. Packed by movers, delivered to your listed residence, a thank you, really, for your service. Thank you. He said that last bit as if I should be saying this to him, but still, it robbed me a bit of my momentum. I'd been surviving on righteous indignation and self-pity for weeks. I realized once the supply seemed threatened. But then I remembered I'd been canned, and my fuel line kicked in once more. Is it because I refused to be on the diversity committee? I demanded. I was loud. The halls were empty. The echo enhanced my argument. Well, that certainly would have, he began, but seeing that I was hearing every word, already planning my deposition for my discrimination lawsuit, he stopped himself. Your file was examined as a whole. You were hired to teach African American literature, not just American literature. You fought that. Simple. So you want the black guy to teach the black books to the white kids. We have a large literature faculty, and they can handle the majority of literature. You were retained to purvey the minority perspective. I see nothing wrong with that. He shrugged, poured a second drink in a second glass, and pushed it forward to me with the base of the bottle. You have academics going off the farm all the time. Yates scholars who ended up following the way to Proust. You have a film professor who was hired as a German linguist. A Guggenheim, a Fulbright, and a Rhodes Scholar. Mr. James, you have accomplished no such honor or distinction. I do not mean that as an insult, just an unfortunate reality. A big part of me hurt a lot, hearing this said aloud, in a big way. I blushed, and as pale as I was, I blushed possibly as no black man had done before me. Staring at him, I settled myself, staring at his bastard tie. Look at it. That bow tie was hypnotizing. Usually, men of power have useless fabric tied around their necks, but his was smaller and tied at a different angle. No big phallic thing for this guy. No, it was even worse. It was, look at me, I have an itty-bitty microphallic tie around my neck, and still I have all this power. Please, listen to me, I pleaded. My work, it's about finding the answer to why we have failed to truly become a post-racial society. It's about finding the cure. 1,000 Baldwin and Ellison essays can't do this. You have to go to the source. That's why I started focusing on Poe. If we can identify how the pathology of whiteness was constructed, then we can learn how to dismantle it. The work I'm doing, it's just books, sure, but it's important, essential research. You're gonna fire me for refusing to sit on the campus diversity committee? You could have compensated for your lack of national presence by embracing our role locally, but alas, he told me and looked away, everyone has a role to play. I put my hand out to him, and before he could meet my palm with his own, I reached higher and I grabbed the tie on his neck. It was a clip-on and it came off easily, barely shook him when I yanked it off with my fist. I was right about being his power source. He was totally quiet after it was taken from him. I could hear a peep behind me as I ran away from confrontation. Okay, I'm gonna jump forward. I went to the bar. Garth was tired from driving back, so stayed back. There was one bar in town, and there was a black guy sitting in it. And this I took to be a divine miracle. Maybe even another sign of my impending turn of fortune. It was a town of only 1,163, just 8 miles north of the campus. Aside from a handful of students during term, there were no black people in the area. In the summer tourism months, on occasion, you could spot a black woman and her white partner passing through, but often these visitors were particularly disinclined to co-ethnic bonding. This brother wasn't, though. When I walked in, he looked up and smiled at me like he knew me, and I gave him the nigga nod, and he hit me right back, so I knew we were cool. I sat down next to him. Mosaic Johnson, hip-hop theorist. Of course he was an academic. Of course I was. There was no other reason for two obviously educated black men to be there. And it was obvious, even of him, dressed as he was in his carefully selected baggy jeans, hat to the side, and other matching oversized pop culture juvenilia. But he was a professor of music, so allowances could be made for style. Chris James, Americanist. And our fists bumped in blackademic bliss. Mr. Johnson was a younger man than I, in both years and manner. Dressed like he was straight out of Compton, but clearly straight out of a postdoc instead. Just arrived in town to start teaching the following term, coming in the summer, because his lease in Chicago was up and this was his future. Eager, earnest. Through drunken eyes, I looked at Mosaic Johnson and I saw myself there. I saw myself showing up in this town, seeing it as foreign territory I was hopeful to invade. 21 years of academic training, culminating in permanent entrenchment on the business side of the classroom. Theory finally turned into practice, a practice of yapping about theory. Just like me, I wept for this bastard. Don't join the diversity committee. I told him when the third round hit, we've been talking, well, for a minute, mostly bemoaning the history of Dutch slavery in the area, but he hung with me with that. A squat dude whose only thinness was his mustache, Mosaic seemed to roll a bit away from me when I said this, but I leaned closer because he needed to hear it. These historically white institutions, they get that one black professor. They put him or her on something they call the diversity committee. Don't let them put you there. It's a slave hold. They'll fight you. They really want you on the diversity committee because if you aren't, there aren't any minorities on committee and the committee isn't diverse. Man, in my work, I deal with the ghetto, the real shit. You know what I'm saying? Reality, he told me, motioning around the room with a silver-ringed hand as if our present setting was a mere computer simulation. I'm not trying to run from the folks. I want to be on that committee. I'm a fighter. I want to be on that committee to bring the fight here. The hand in the air formed into a fist. I looked around the room at the 20 or so white liberals taking him in on the slide. They loved it. They loved that fist. If I was still here tomorrow, they would come up to me and ask why I never raised the black power fist like the new guy. Undaunted, I continued. No, you don't, and I'll tell you why. The diversity committee has one primary purpose, so that the school can say it has a diversity committee. They need that for when the students get upset about race issues or general ethnic stuff. It allows the faculty and administration to point to it and go, everything's going to be okay. We formed the committee. People find that very relaxing. It's sort of like if you had a fire, and instead of putting it out, you formed a fire committee. But none of the ideas that come out of that committee have ever been implemented. See, nothing the committee has suggested in 30 years has ever been funded. It's a gerbil wheel meant to keep this nigga boy running. Ellison, he smiled. I knew a Black Arthur reference would get to him. Now that cat was straight hip hop, he continued. I would have corrected the hip to be, but what's the difference of Black American musical traditions among kin? Chris James, you know, I read some of your early work, your Ellison theory. That had to be. Why don't you bring it like that no more? He asked me. And I glowed at this. Old musicians asked to play their classic songs. They must get this feeling. You're tired of it, sure, but at least somebody cares. I thanked him, told him how I've developed, how I've been drawn towards 19th century fiction, Edgar Allan Poe. As I'm getting up to hit the John, right as I'm turned away, Mosaic Johnson says, man, nobody cares about that Poe thing. And I laughed back at him and told him thanks for getting my pain, and the moments I was off to pissing. In the can, standing in front of the urinal, I was still for a moment. It felt like it was the first time I was truly still since this whole disaster had started. Even when I was pulling into a ball on the floor, I was rocking and reeling internally. But this bathroom, this empty bathroom, it was like a temple, utterly serene. And within that silence, clarity came to me. I started thinking about my past and my new friend. And I started to think about everything he had said and all of his responses. And I was surprised to find a previously untacted negative tone there. Not in his words, but in little performances of his demeanor. His last statement being the irrefutable proof of this. You're not in the music department, are you? I said to him on my return. I didn't even sit down, I was standing. I was shaking. My voice was cracking a little bit too, which was beyond my control. No, I am not. My instrument is the QWERTY keyboard, he admitted. Took the last swig from his Hennessy and then swiveled to face me. You're here to replace me, aren't you? You're here to take my job, to take my office. That's why you're in this bar tonight, isn't you? Man, just relax. Ain't nothing personal. Yes, I am the new hire. Yes, it was your tenure line. I never said I was a music prof. I said I was a hip-hop theorist, okay? That's my school literary criticism, right? I'm here to bring the beat to the text, that's it. It's all good. And then hell yes, I will represent myself as a strong black man on this campus. Right. You're here to be the diversity committee. Look, cuz, unlike you, clearly, I believe in trying to change things. Fighting against racism where I see it. I don't back down. And I don't apologize for that either. Hell yeah, I'm down for the down committee. I'm down for the fight. You know what I'm saying? A PhD can't manage a lot of menace, but we are good at reading between the lines. I knew exactly what he meant. No footnotes needed. Still, I stepped closer. You know what I think? I think when you fight the same battles with the same tactics, you don't get any farther. That unless you address the roots of the problem, it will continue to grow. This was fairly eloquent for me, given that it was off the cuff, no peer review or rewrites. And I was proud that I had thought of it there, and not later via the spirit of the stairs. It was the arrogance brought on by this success that made me pause 2 steps into my exit, turn, and continue. And the white folks here know that, and they like it that way. You're hired to be the angry black guy, get it? You're not fighting whiteness, you're feeding its perversion. You're here so you can assuage their guilt without making them actually change a damn thing. They want you to be on the diversity committee because every village needs a fool. Still, I felt I was sticking to my thesis closely, not diverting off into too much bullshit. If Mosaic Johnson had kept his mushy buttocks on the stool instead of getting in my face, it would have been a decent closer. Oh, I get it. I get it now, why you love Poe. You two share one big thing in common. Neither one of you is a damn bit relevant anymore. This college can really use you, I returned, preparing myself to hoof it. Every good zoo needs a caged gorilla. It was an inflammatory statement. I lit that shit on fire too, just to watch him burn. Even I was offended, to tell the truth. And that's why I chose that level of toxic phraseology to hit him. He hit me back, though, first in the gut, and then when I went down to the floor in several other places. Mosaic Johnson could definitely bring the beat. To me personally, he brought the beat down. Not to be confused with the downbeat. Poe doesn't matter, he said as he pummeled. I respected him for that, though. He guessed correctly that his weak suburban mini-mall kung fu punches might not be enough to hurt me. Tikalivi! I laughed as the crowd pulled Mosaic Johnson from my body. Tikalivi! Thank you. All right, this will work, and maybe we can kill these legs. We'll see if this works. If it doesn't, we'll talk. There we go. Oh, great. Awesome. It works. Okay. As I said, when I was working on PIM, and PIM just took a really long time because I had to figure out a lot of things. I had to figure out voice. I had to figure out a way to balance some of my my background from working middle class voice in Philadelphia and an academic background. And then I also had to figure out how to get people to read a book that was based on a book that no one wants to read. And so it was kind of tricky. So I ended up having a lot of drafts. Usually my books the other novels I wrote took about 2 or 3 years. This one took 9 years. So in that time I started working on comic books. And I'll kind of show you how I got into comics and how I actually put the work together. And in particular, I'll talk mostly about Papa Midnite, Incognegro, and Dark Brain. And I actually have another one coming out next year. This is me when I was a kid in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. To show when this was, that R2-D2 looking thing is a dishwasher, so that kind of thing. And the Rothko behind it was probably the closest I got to art as a kid. Mostly, I read comic books, like this one. And I really, like, my parents are divorced, and I grew up with my mother, and these comic images and really masculine images were really important to me and a lot of my friends. And even today, I think that the comic books had a particular effect on men of color and boys of color. Because even when I go to like stores in New York and Philadelphia, there's a disproportionate amount of Black and Latino and Asian men in the store, probably in the population. But I think it might be some connection with power and issues of the kid. And even with this one, when you look, here we have the first issue of The Incredible Hulk. And down here we have this little David Banner, you've probably barely seen in the back, but you might have seen this cover before. And then he grows into this massive, powerful image of manhood. And the way it's actually drawn is almost phallic, too. And like you have these lines here where he's growing sort of, you know, like a penis into erect form. So there's a lot of this masculine imagery that kind of connects with me as a kid. Thing was, the majority of the comic icons that I grew up with, like here, these DC comic book heroes that we all recognize, Superman, Batman, and all that, these Marvel comic book heroes, they had one thing in common. There was no Black people, there was no Asian people, there was no Latino people. It was a white imagination and a white mythic landscape. And I think the best way to kind of think about the comic book world and those superheroes is to imagine them as a new version of our own gods. And in a world where religion has kind of decreased, and we don't really, even the religion we have is monotheistic as opposed to a polytheistic religion that most of us had for most of human existence. So these stories are very much told in the same way. The same stories are told again and again and again, just the same way Greek mythology or other myths would have been told. The Superman origin story is told repeatedly. The Batman origin story is told repeatedly. So when we come up with these characters and everyone is white, it's a real kind of statement about how we viewed America at that point. Today, if you were going to come up with a sample of 5 people who represented America, there's no way we would even think to having everyone be white. We just don't do it anymore. We'd have kind of one of each and maybe a gay one on the end. Right? So the first black comic came about in 1965. It was called Lobo. It's about a black millionaire that traveled through the South fighting injustice. It was science fiction. And it really, one of the reasons it came about was, at the time, there was a lot of cowboy comic books in the store. And so having a black comic book was an opportunity to set that apart from the rest of it. And if you notice, the same thing happens with new television networks and other sort of marketing, where when companies first start, they actually go after a set audience that hasn't been served particularly well. And the same thing happened with this. And of course, the comic book still folded because it was about a black millionaire fighting injustice in the South. It was interesting. The first comic book, actually, Hero, comes in Black Panther in 1966, which is a fascinating character because it's sort of an Afrocentric superhero that is created by white people, by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. But he comes from a mythic African land that avoided slavery because it was more technologically advanced in the West. And he's called Black Panther, and actually it comes out in '66, so it actually predates, the first issues of this, the first work predates the Black Panther Party. It doesn't predate the use of the Black Panther image with SNCC and other parts of the civil rights struggle, but it does predate the party. And after that, they start going towards other black characters fitting in this universe, and that was kind of the first integration that was happening in the comic book world. But you have characters like this who, Power Man, they're still kind of based on existing stereotypes. Like Power Man was sort of the blaxploitation character. He was a prison inmate who had been given some sort of drug that made him super powerful. Now he was on the streets, he was fighting crime if you paid him. So there was still, a little kind of weirdness. Now later, most of these characters, I mean, they're characters and they have these narratives, but from a business standpoint, they're corporate icons. So when they did have to integrate these groups, but the way they're integrating them, they don't want to throw out existing characters and throw in, some new character, I don't know, Black Static or something, because that character hasn't had the history of brand development. So they're keeping these things as set characters, but they're changing the identities. So Green Lantern in the corner goes from being a white character to a black character, and they change that around. And several other of the characters over the years will take existing ones and kind of switch them around to modernize them. The modern version of Power Man, you can barely see probably there in the front, Luke Cage is more like a superpowered acorn representative. The criminal aspect is taken out. So one of the biggest shifts, though, in comic books has been the audience. Because when I was a kid, kids read comic books. I didn't have video games. Their cartoons came on, but they only came on Saturday morning from 8 to 12, and that was it for the week. So comic books were a major outlet for me and a lot of my friends. But today, kids have so many more distractions. So the audience for comic books has become adults. Largely, the people who, like myself, who grew up with comic books, and also other adults who've actually gotten into them later. So because the audience has shifted, the writing has shifted as well. The level of sophistication of the work has shot through the roof. And now the work is directly aimed at grown-ups, and they want that type of sophistication. The thing is, it's very difficult for them to get writers to work in the field. One, because the work you're doing is script work, and most people who want to write scripts want to do it for a lot more money than the comic books are going to pay. So what they've been doing is recruiting people who actually write for adults and see if they'd be interested just to do it as a labor of love to write comic books. And so in 2004, I had this book come out the year before called Hunting in Harlem, which was sort of a satire set in Harlem in the tradition of Chester Himes, as you heard, and other writers. And it had sort of genre elements that I was playing with as well. And because of that, I was contacted by DC Comics to come in and talk about possibly doing an idea and coming up with my own comic book. So when I approached them, I came in with this idea for a comic book based around the Great Negro Plot. The Great Negro Plot, what I was working on at the time, is the story of the supposed slave conspiracy in Manhattan in 1741. And it's a fascinating story, and I thought it would translate really well into comic books, because the type of work I was interested in doing was work that kind of brought different historical events to life. But when I was pitching to them, they weren't particularly excited about that, because it's a large corporation. They were excited about the fact that they had Keanu Reeves coming out in a movie called Constantine. And they were saying, okay, well, we're willing to let you come in, but we were thinking maybe you could deal with the character from Constantine, and we have a black character, and I can deal with. So, you know, I figured, why not? I've always wanted to write comic books. I'll go for it. I was kind of scared that, like, my literary street cred would be shot. It's like you train to be a ballerina, and then you start stripping. You know, like, people might act a little funny. But then I figured, like, I don't give a shit about New York literary establishment. They can kiss my ass. And I'll say that in Oregon, because we're really far away. So then I went and did it. And the other thing that actually was particularly interesting about the project was to take this book that they do called Hellblazer. It was one of the most popular books, and this is Vertigo. It's the adult wing of DC Comics. And they had this character called Papa Midnite. And Papa Midnite, you can see here, he's got a top hat on and tails and no shirt. In this one, you barely see, but he actually has a grass skirt underneath it. And he's a classic noble savage archetype, right? If he was naked, he would not look as savage as he does. So you have these elements of formal wear contrasted against his naked body. It's the basic purpose of this racist archetype is to say that even if you try to make these people civilized, they're still savages at heart. So I like the idea of going in and taking an existing character and kind of modernizing him and making him, instead of something that you cringe at, something that actually was nuanced and sophisticated. So I took that Papa Midnite character and I worked with the artist, and we came up with this version instead. And I really like this version, but now I go around to schools, and I always, every time I realize, oh, I do have him smoking. That really wasn't the best idea, but besides that, trying to keep up with a more modern version. And we actually, for this image, we used pictures of the rapper Mos Def as a jump-off point, and I'll show you how we do that a lot of times with the images. So from this, the projects that they do at DC Comics and at Marvel, they're assembly line work, very similar to Disney and McDonald's, all of them coming out of the exact same point. Efficiency through everyone doing an individual part. So one person is writing, one person is doing the pencils, one person is doing the ink, one person is doing the color, one person is doing the lettering, and another person is doing the cover. And that's how they managed to get these books out quickly enough. And so this is a different artist inside, and he's from Chicago. Yeah, you can see the difference in the fashion choice. Apparently white long coats are fashionable in Chicago, so he ended up with one. What I tried to do with these comic books was do what I do with my own work. Is I lay my life on the table, and then I chop myself up, and I kind of serve it like sashimi. And that's I'm not good enough to do it any other way. I'm only good when I can take things I actually know. I tried to do the same thing here, and there's a couple of things here. I spent time in Ghana, in West Africa, and I love the Akan symbols. And one of the ones that I loved the most was the Sankofa symbol, the thing that looks like a heart. In my neighborhood in Philadelphia, Germantown, it's a very old neighborhood. It's one of the first neighborhoods in the country, and there's a lot of metalwork on the gates of the houses. And on some of these places in the metalwork, I saw that symbol. When I got to Ghana, I recognized that symbol because I'd seen fences that had that symbol. And I thought they were hearts. And I found out later that some of the people doing the metalwork were freed blacks who were putting these Akan symbols from their own life into their work. And the Sankofa symbol is particularly interesting, not just because it looks cool, but because it means to understand the future, you have to look to the past. To understand where you're going, you have to look behind you. And what the symbol actually is, and this is one version of it, another version is of a duck looking over its shoulder. So it's a flight bird that's going forward, but it has to look to the past. So I use that for the basis of the storyline. And I also did other things from my life. In the middle, we see a rabbit. It was Brer Rabbit. I grew up with the Brer Rabbit stories. And at the end, you see a guy in a turban as well. And that's taken from this. When I was a kid, there really were not many consistent images of black people in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And the Philadelphia Museum of Art used to be free on Sunday, so I would go down all the time on Sunday and walk around. And unless it was a special show, there just weren't that many images of people that looked like people in my neighborhood. But this one was there, and it's called The Moor. And that always was in my head. I even had a poster of it in college. So I used that imagery, and I made the character that Moor, and took the Papa Midnite character and made him sort of into this African-based, interesting, hopefully, character. So that actually did okay, the book, from the business aspect. And even when you go back to Poe, all these questions of the business aspect, they end up influencing the work a lot of times. The only reason Poe tried to write that one novel is because he thought it would pay. It didn't, but that's what he thought. So if you can see in this image in the top corner, there's these legs dangling up there. It's very hard to figure out what they are, but it's of a lynching. So I started thinking about this idea of lynching, and I thought, I have my own family history with lynching, and I thought it would be an interesting way to explore it. The other thing I thought was interesting about it was I couldn't think of an innovative way to deal with the same issue in prose. And I'm a huge fan of literature of the Harlem Renaissance, but they did a great job. I can't do what Wallace Thurman did, and he already did it. So I thought the idea of tackling that landscape with the graphic work could be interesting. So I'm going to show you some images of lynching. Luckily, the images are so small that you probably won't be able to see them. But so what I did was I started looking through postcards of lynchings and trying to get an idea for a visual representation. There's a great book called Without Sanctuary that's a collection of the postcards from lynchings. So lynching, when I try and explain it to people, I'm always shocked that I thought everybody knew about lynching, and after this book came out, I was surprised a lot of people had no idea about it, and were shocked that I even knew about this. But lynching is basically the largest and first domestic terrorist campaign in the United States. That's how I like to sum it up. And as an act of terrorism, and as an act of creating terror, when people were lynched, they would take pictures of this and put them into postcards and send them around, because there wasn't the internet. This is how you spread the word. So at these lynchings, you could buy tokens afterwards, these cards that would be sent to other people to send the message of how the social order was going to be maintained in whatever county it was happening. And it was really an effective means of publicizing white supremacy. So I took these images and I started pulling them together and starting to get a better idea about the narrative, and looked at these individual postcards to try and kind of place myself directly in the era. The other thing I looked at them for is the actual clothes they're wearing. All these things I never have to worry about as a novelist. When you're doing a graphic novel, they have to look like they do. The cars have to look the same, the buildings have to look the same. So I collected a lot of these images together. And these history of memento. And here, here we have an example of a sample of hair being taken along with the postcard. Sometimes even chunks of the body were cut off and sent to other people. Other times things would happen, they would dress the bodies up, particularly military people that were murdered, to try to disrespect them later. And here we have the image of somebody who was lynched dressed up like a clown. He has clown makeup, and on the side you have a stick holding his head up. And you can even see the shadow of the man doing that. So I had the subject matter, and I'd done the research and figured out what era I wanted to do. But the next step was coming up with a character. And the character I decided to use, based on my own history, was Walter White. And here we see Roy Wilkins, Walter White, and Thurgood Marshall. And of course, Walter White is the one who actually looks white. If you wrote that in a book, no one would believe that was his name. But that's really what it was. When I was a kid, I used to play this game called Incognegro. And my cousin was also mixed, and we used to fantasize that the same thing that was getting my ass beat at school every day would somehow be an asset. That looking white was somehow an advantage. You know, fantasize maybe an Underground Railroad or something like that. And this thing that like often disenfranchised me would be like a superpower. So I had that element. And I have my own history as well. This is my great-grandfather who, at points in his life, passed for white to escape different problems. Usually just in the sense of driving around and going to what bathroom and things like that. But I have that history, and I also have a history in my family of people avoiding lynching as well. But I needed still a better angle, and that kind of happened when my twins were born. And this is my daughter up here, Chloe, and this is my son, Liam. Liam was supposed to be called Kofi, and then he came out with red hair and pale skin, and I just couldn't do it to him. And then I started thinking about, what if they were born 100 years ago? They would have a dramatically different experience. I mean, today, it's just a novelty that one is born with more of an African phenotype and one is born with a more European phenotype. But 100 years ago, and really 60 years ago, that would have had a lot harsher repercussions. And then when you deal with siblings, you always have the inevitable conflict between the two. So I had my basic idea, and what I was thinking was, I'm going to come up with a narrative where I have two brothers who look very much like each other, but one looks black and one looks more white. And one is investigating the attempt at lynching on his own brother. So when I write these scripts, I don't draw anything. I just write instructions. It's like I don't make the IKEA furniture. I make the instructions for somebody else to put the furniture together. So this is what I actually come up with. This is a script. Now, the difference between a movie script or television script and a graphic novel script is, in a movie script, you say a guy walks across the room, right? In a graphic novel script, what you say is a guy moves his foot out to the side. You see 2 feet standing next to each other. You see a close-up of the man looking across the room. It's cut off into different panels. So every panel has a description. And here I'm describing what the scene will look like. And everyone, you can see it says 1.1, that's page 1, panel 1, and it's a full page shot. Second one, page 2, panel 1, and then the actual dialogue with inside it. So once I write the script, I send that to the artist, in this case it was Warren Please. And Warren was a British artist, and he's not used to the vagaries of American racial identity. So I had to send him pictures of all these Incognegros so he could figure out basically how to have people who look primarily white but are of African descent. And so I sent a picture of cultural critic, a literary critic, Antoine Briard, Carol Channing, because Carol Channing had just come out of the racial closet at the time. My favorite Jennifer Beal, and even the guy from Prison Break. So once we have that, he sends me back images of the actual characters. Ooh, they're so light. Let's see if I can. Oh. Yeah, it doesn't affect too much. So these are the actual character breakdowns. You can barely see them on here. See if those are better. A little better. I use angles from some of these characters, like this character. I sent him pictures of Cab Calloway for that. And then for my main characters, we went back and forth trying to get characters that look somewhat similar to each other. And from there, we come up with the actual images. These are so faint that we get to move through these quickly. He sends me pencils back. So when I work in these graphic novels, every day in my email, I get a page of graphic novel. And I look at that and I decide whether or not I'm interested in doing it. And if I'm not, I move on. But even, you'll be able to see this one. Even things like the text have to be created. We tried to come up with a font that was a 1930s font, but because it's a 1930s font, there's a reason they don't use them anymore, because they're very difficult to read. So we came up with a modern one. It just looked crazy. So we actually created, the artist actually created his own font to have something that referenced the past but was a part of the future. And then you get from there to these finished versions that are actually inked in. So the artist has to go back over all those pencils. Usually now digitally, we'll go over it and ink it in the past actual physical ink of all the images behind it. From there, some people wonder about this. We had to come up with covers. This one, it just looked like somebody had a shadow. It took me forever to figure out what was there. So I told the artist that he just darkened it in. It still didn't make any sense to me. It looked like the shadow was leaning on a stick. So we came up with making sure we show the lynching, but this looked like an odd picture of Speaker's Corner in London. So he said, okay, we have the danger in there. That didn't work really either. And we said we needed like a really ambiguous Negro to kind of land it, so they put me on the cover. And then after that, this is the version that went out mostly to critics, and then we ended up putting in the quotes behind that. And I'll show you just 5 more minutes. I'll show you the rest for Dark Rain. Dark Rain was, I wanted to figure out a way to write about the Hurricane Katrina in a way that people who don't buy books about Hurricane Katrina would actually read. So I came up with a genre piece. When I actually take my books out for the first time, I have a pitch letter like this, where I just say the synopsis at the top, and then I break down the characters. And from there, we end up looking for an artist. The artist we ended up signing to use for this was this guy, Simon Gain. And has anybody here been to New Orleans? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm in the Gulf Coast. I think everybody goes there every week like I do. So I saw this, it reminded me so much of New Orleans. I thought he really got it, and it was really impressive because the guy had never been to America and he lived in Bath, England. So we agreed to work on it, and he looked at the script, and he looked at my main character, Dabney, and came up with this version, and my main character, Emmett, and came up with that version. And I liked them, but they were really stylized. They were stylized almost like a fashion magazine, like a French fashion magazine stylized, and I wanted a grittier look, so I asked him for more realism. So we ended up coming up with this version of it. But to make sure that we actually cast our story well, and by cast I mean it's almost like you're finding the perfect actor and coming up with expression. The artist comes up with different versions of expressions, and I can look at them, and we can figure out what he means when he hears angry and what I mean, so that we're actually communicating well in the scripts. And that's how we come up with our final versions. And there's disconnects. Like, we had this version of the Emmett character, and to me it just looked like George Clooney. You know, maybe it's slightly hungover, but still kind of sexy, too sexy. So I wanted him to look more, kind of, a little more methy acting. So we went around that version. With every character, we kind of pop through this and just get a feel for them. And sometimes we have bases, like this character was originally based on Ruby Dee, the actress. I needed a Creole woman character who we could connect with. Other characters, like this guy, I found this random picture, I searched do-rag, and this image came up. And the crazy thing is, it's taken by a friend of mine in Philly, and I found that out like a year later. I should have recognized the houses in the background. But that character ends up becoming this. My editor, Chris Jackson at Random House, was pissing me off. So I said, we had this guy in the book who's supposed to be annoying. So he doesn't know that yet. He never figured it out. So I use my script as, again, I break things into what's going to happen in each panel. When the artist, Simon Gain, was looking at it, he was really great with the characters, and he jumped in and started working on it. But as you can see here, one of the images is missing. And so what he ended up doing was, I showed him where we were talking mostly about the lower Ninth Ward and other parts of New Orleans. And I gave him addresses so he could look on Google Maps. But he really needed to see the place. So we ended up meeting up. He came to America for the first time, and we drove around New Orleans for a week. And with a camera, taking pictures of places. Trying to get a picture of the bridge, seeing this in the book. We needed a hardware store that had a balcony, so we ended up casting this image. Trying to get views of the Esplanades just so we know what the physical space looks like. And a really good example of this, and I'll close with this, is when I went to pick him up, he's British. He flew like 14 hours to get to New Orleans airport. The thing is, he didn't know about something we have in America called CPT. And CPT means, even though I was 6 hours away, I was on colored people time, and I got it there about an hour late. So while he was waiting at the airport, he saw a very attractive woman, and he's single, and so he decided he was going to flirt with her. And he started to do her picture. And he hadn't actually been out of the airport, he was waiting for me to pick him up. So he drew her picture, and I'd sent him all these images of shotgun shacks, and he had an intellectual understanding of what New Orleans looked like. So he had her picture, and then he put, if you can see, this little dots of shotgun shacks in the background. 3 days after we were there, and we'd actually gone all around New Orleans and had a very good we had a real good time. He ended up going back to the same image and updating it for me before I left. And this image ended up becoming this image. right? And now you can see the presence of those shotgun shacks are massive now, you know, and the greenery that's there is not just, you know, there casually, but it's almost integrated into the architecture. And that's what New Orleans is actually like. The other thing about most of the places that have architecture like this is the streets are very narrow, so that you're right up on these buildings. And even though they're very small, they have a really powerful impact. And so I use that as an example now even for my prose students at University of Houston to tell them that's the difference between an intellectual understanding of something and an actual sensual understanding of the world. All right, thank you very much. We do. If you need to leave, feel free to, do you mind if I do that? If you need to leave, are you happy to leave now? And I'll take a couple questions. Three questions and I let you all go. Yes.
All right. Well, we read Incognegro in the comics reading group last month or earlier this month. It seems like so longer ago. But and I noticed reading through the book that the structure from page to page seems like every page was self-contained. Like each page had sort of almost a cliffhanger for the next page, and I was curious reading through it if what
was the intention?
Yeah, why did you do that?
Sometimes it's on purpose, sometimes it's natural. What I did try mostly to do was have a cliffhanger angle on the odd page. So basically, when you're reading a graphic novel, you're going to have a reveal, some sort of factual reveal. You want that reveal to be here, so that you can't see it on the other side. And so most of my rhythm was trying to nail those kind of cliffhangers so that you could turn the page and not see it. Because one of my pet peeves is when I read comics and there's some big reveal and it's right there and you see it as soon as you turn the page. And other times, I think once you start getting into that rhythm, the rhythm becomes very staccato in the book. And the narrative style I used for that I took from noir films. And a lot of times in the noirs, every scene ends with that kind of pull you in break. So half of those were on purpose, and the other half were organic because of that form. Yes?
So you mentioned that the way that you work is sort of taking your own experience and chopping it up and turning it into a creative piece.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, obviously Pym is in first person, and I'm wondering if you've tried to do that and in third person, or sort of what your relationship is to first person and third person.
Oh, yeah. The second novel I wrote, Hunting in Harlem, was in third. The first novel I wrote was in first. You know, at first I used to think that most of the books that I grew up loving weren't in first, and I kind of looked down on first, and because I just thought it was too easy, too simple. But later, I sort of realized if there's a character who has a really strong voice, then first is fantastic. And so with both the drop and with Pym, I had characters who really just like talked and you wanted to hear what they said. So that's why I got into it. In my other work, like when I write short stuff sometimes, not often, and I work on other different types of projects. And I don't always use it. It's just if I'm going to need it. Right now I have 2 novels that I'm working on, which is a mess. But one of them is in third person because I have multiple characters from multiple angles, and I want a level of distance to view their action. Then I have another one that's very much in first because I'm really interested in getting in that one person's head and hearing their voice. But I like doing everything. My biggest thing is just trying to flip it up. It's probably been a detriment to me to find readers, but I've always tried to do dramatically different projects every time, just to kind of push myself and make it worthwhile.
You said some really interesting things early on about your discovering comics and having powerful identifications. And I was wondering whether, and to what extent you think about the difference between the way the two different media affect that issue of identification. When you have that added that visual element, from the readerly point of view, do you have you thought about that at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, to me, like, there's different levels of intimacy, you know. Like, there's a reason why both times they tried to make a movie out of Lolita, it was horrible, you know, because watching something or viewing something is a public experience, whereas you know, a novel and prose can be like, it's like sitting in the closet in the dark with somebody whispering in your ear, and it has that level of intimacy. But the visual medium has all these other potentials, and you can actually use the images themselves to tell the whole story. And what I've been trying to get closer to, and I don't think I've been too completely successful to, but what I want to get closer to eventually is being able to tell the entire story just with the pictures. So that if you didn't read the language, you would still understand what's happening, and for the dialogue to just be enhancing the character as well. So and that's kind of a shift. It's also the time you're spending. And to read a novel, I mean, it takes me. I'm teaching all the time, but it takes me a couple of days a week to get through a novel of actual reading time. Whereas I'll go to bed at 10 o'clock with a graphic novel, and I'll be done by 10:15, 11:15. So, so you're encountering the characters in a lot quicker way, too, which also affects the intimacy. So, yeah, I think about with the different projects I'm working on, I think about what my goal is, and if I have a lot to say in a really intricate way, I use prose. You know, some people can do that with comics, but I can't. But if I have one kind of note that I'm trying to hit really well and explore, then comics works well for that.
I have a business ND question.
Okay.
So you have quite the impressive Twitter following.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just wonder how that fits in, if that was a lark, if that's just something you enjoy doing, if that was a calculated marketing scheme to, you know, to broaden your appeal, or I just wonder, yeah.
Really, yeah, I mean, started as a joke. No, I just started goofing off on there. It's like, because I just goof off. I was on Facebook and having a great time, and all these people I spent my entire life trying to get away from got on too. So I got on Twitter, and like the same way when I was first on Facebook, it was only like really interesting people. Like every medium I get on, when I first get on it, it's really interesting. Like I remember first getting in news groups on the internet, and it was like in '92, and it was really interesting people. And then it wasn't, and then so yeah, I got on there. A friend sent me a request, and I went on once and didn't use it again for 6 months and went back, which is also my MO for every new thing. And then I started playing around with it, and what actually happened with it was the big reason the Pimp took 9 years was because I screwed up the voice, and I had been working on the Great Negro Plot, and I had adopted this this voice that I had basically hadn't even stolen from 18th century literature. I had stolen half from Gustavus Vasa and Lado Luciano, and half from random 19th century voices. So my voice was just insane, and I'd been stuck up at Bard College for 4 years, and I just like, it really messed with my head. I mean, this whole book is basically about that. And so I needed to get my voice back. And so I started playing with Twitter, and I realized, like, my writing voice sounds like my id, you know? So if I just let my id say whatever it wants, I'll hit my voice again. And I did that, it worked. And then I kept doing it, and then what happened was, I was just having fun, and it was still like a small group, and then all of a sudden, Twitter themselves ended up picking me as one of the people to follow. And then so it went from getting 1 or 2 new followers a day to all of a sudden getting 100 new followers a day. But most of those followers aren't real humans. I mean, really. And they're like, you know, a dry cleaning place in New Mexico. And, you know, probably for every 100 people, there's probably 10 people who are actually engaged human beings. Yeah, and actually it's funny because I just today went on there and said, I'm not doing this for 4 months. So I'm not going to be on there for a while. But it's been really good. And I think this has been interesting because it's the first medium of this age I've seen writers who I respect really embrace. And it's been nice getting a community up of people, and you know, and also I have tenure now, so like I can just do whatever I want. They can't really touch me without like spending a lot of money to do it. So yeah, so it's been kind of liberating. And sorry, one more thing on it, like this working on books that take years and years and years, and there's huge expectations, but it's really nice to be able to just say something, and in an instant, 100 people respond to it, and that's pretty amazing. And like when I was first writing, like a lot of artists, I rejected my parents' generation, and I rejected a lot of really kind of haphazard poetry and stuff, and black arts poetry and writing that I grew up with in Philly. That I thought, you know, it was stuff created. I remember the last time I was in a reading in Philly, a guy came up to the mic and was like, "I have a poem called Mumia Should Be Freer," and I didn't write it down. I'm just gonna say it right now. And then I just saw he just picked up the mic and in 20 minutes was like, black, 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 black. And I was like, no. You know, and so I was like, my generation, and you see this in some of the poets from my age group, we ended up adopting new ancestors, and that's why I'm so excited to see David Bradley here, really. Big brother. But yeah, so we adopted a whole new family, and I rejected a lot of the work that wasn't tight, and found all these amazing, utterly eccentrics that were fascinating, and going in a different direction. So in some ways, it's really weird to be on Twitter, because Twitter is in some ways what the black arts folks were doing, and like the irony is not lost on me. But I'm old enough now that I can, you know, accept that. Hey, but I think I've held you long enough. So thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.